I'm about to share is something that is unbelievable, and I have survived a traumatic event that I wish had never happened. This event in time has left me where I have been robbed not only of my future but also my past. I feel like someone might know something that might help me, but at this time, I'm deathly afraid to use my name because of the inquiries that may ensue if I do so, and I prefer that you keep this contact information to yourself. But feel free to read it, as there may be others that listen to your program that have had similar experiences. I will keep this short as possible, and I don't have much strength now, and my memories are vague, but there are still pieces of everything since the event occurred. My first memory is standing in the middle of the road in the middle of a pitch black night, which might not be that unusual, except that I was completely naked, confused, scared, and unaware of how I got there, nor even where this road was. Suddenly, there was a bright light racing toward me and a loud noise, and then another and then another. Now you can envision how confused I must have been, having no idea what these things were. I thought maybe they were cars because they were honking at me and dodging me to keep from hitting me. Another vehicle came speeding toward me with red and blue lights, and a big guy jumped out of the car and came running up to me, yelling in a loud, rude voice. Well, I didn't understand what he was saying, and in fact, I was unable to even speak, and I must have looked like I was stoned out of my mind. And when he grabbed my arm, it felt like his hand was hot as fire and it burned. I remember jerking my arm away from him and screaming in pain instantly, and he didn't waste a second throwing his arm around my neck and tossing me face first onto the blacktop. The fear I was experiencing was beyond belief. It was like I was being attacked by a monster, and I felt like he was trying to hurt me. He handcuffed me, and he threw me into the car, and he took me to the police station, where he took my fingerprints and photos of me, and then asked me questions for 2 hours, but I never understood a word of what he said. And after growing impatient, he handcuffed me again and drove me to the local hospital, where they strapped me to a bed and started doing all types of tests on me. I now know they were testing me for drug and substances that were illegal through my blood and urine, which they took from me without my consent. I never understood what they were saying, nor where I actually was, and over the next 4 days nothing changed until 2 uniformed soldiers, who I didn't recognize, entered my room and took the restraints off my wrists. They put me in dark brown pants and shirt, and they gave me a pair of boots, and then they escorted me out to their vehicle. I was cuffed up again and driven to the airport and flown to Jacksonville, Florida, and admitted to the Naval Hospital. There I was treated for my memory loss as well as minor radiation poisoning. I was put into a room by myself, and I had an endless flow of doctors and visitors over the next several weeks, and then 2 men and 2 women came to see me. I later discovered they were my parents, and my fiancé and my brother, whom I did not know at the time, and when I realized some months later, I felt horrible about that. They kept coming back for a couple of weeks until the only one that stayed was my mother, and she kept coming back day in and day out. I still couldn't understand what she was saying or remember anything about them. She began to show me pictures, and she read me stories, and she told me of my childhood and sang songs and hymns over the next several months, and I finally began to remember bits and pieces of my life before that dark night in the middle of Utah. I grew more and more aware of my surroundings and my past as time went on, and my language skills started to return to me. I was so excited to realize that I was beginning to understand the doctors and nurses when they came in, as well as the people from Washington, who never seemed to be short of questions. I had no answers for most of what they were asking me, but was more than willing to listen and try. It was like my life was coming back to me slowly, and if these people could help me remember, I was game for anything. They attempted hypnosis as well as some truth drugs and some other drugs that should have helped me remember, but everything stopped. I only got to a certain point of memory. What was truly shocking was that it seems that the evening before I was found in Utah, I was at work some miles away, and in fact was over 2,800 miles away, in the middle of the Bermuda Triangle aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, which is one of the Navy's aircraft carriers. I apparently traveled over 2,800 miles in less than 3 hours, which is over 900 miles per hour, and the military was interested in how this occurred. They had quite a few theories about what happened. I was informed that I was on the USS Ronald Reagan and we had just left Jacksonville after spending 5 months in port, and I was headed back around South America to the Pacific. I was one of the deck crew as one of the blue crew or salvage wreck team as well as an ordnance personnel, and I was told that I spent all my waking hours above deck even when not on duty. When I missed muster the next morning and after a search of the ship, it was assumed that I had fallen overboard, and several aircraft were launched to comb the ocean looking for the needle in the haystack. 3 days later, when my prints and picture reached the military, they sent a police escort to retrieve me. Theory 1 was that I was AWOL from the time we left port and had someone covering for me on the ship, but too many people had witnessed me there aboard the ship. And the second was that I was some sort of spy. And the third was I was trying to get a Section 8 discharge. After 6 months in total at the hospital in Jacksonville, they transported me to Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland, to be examined by the nation's finest military medical staff. I had constant visitors there from Washington, as well as psychologists from the military and all types of doctors. They concluded that I was not lying to my superiors and brass, and that something had happened to me that impacted me so much that all my memory had been suppressed. I was in Walter Reed for 4 years in total, and I was discharged on a medical, and I received total disability. My case was classified until recently, in which it was unclassified at the same time as the UFO case files. It was then I saw the videos from the information release on the videos and photos taken from the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan the night I had vanished. Up until that time, I had no idea this could have been connected, and I wondered if this is what all the interest in me was for 5 years that I spent locked up in the hospitals. I had moved back in with my parents after leaving the hospital. I was still struggling with some of the most basic parts of living alone, such as driving and shopping and paying bills. And over the next several years, I experienced 2 more events where I was found walking miles away from my car, or where I was last seen some hours later. Both episodes, I had no memory of how I got there or what happened just prior to realizing that I was lost. I was seen at the VA every 4 months as my body was aging at a rate of 3 times the rate of a normal person. And now I'm going to tell you something that will blow your mind. Just 3 months ago, when going to Virginia, my brother slammed the van door shut on my hand and something went wrong immediately. My hand erupted in pain like I had never experienced before. It was like I had struck my hand into a vat of hot oil, but it was inside my hand, not on the surface. A neon orange bruise the size of a silver dollar appeared under the skin and began to spread and grow, and I was rushed inside the hospital where they sedated me and went to work on my hand. When I woke, a massive portion of my hand had been removed, and there were officers from the military present again. I was informed that the impact of the van door on my hand had ruptured some sort of organic device the length of 20 millimeters and the diameter of a grain of rice, and it had tentacles stretching out over 6 inches from all over the surface area into my hand. They had located a point between my fingers where this device was implanted, yet I had no knowledge of what this was, nor where it came from, let alone when it happened. The next morning, I was back at Walter Reed, and they were now scanning my body looking for more of these devices, in which they located 17 more in different parts of my body, including my feet, hands, arms, neck, and connected to my tailbone, as well as 2 that were implanted in my nostrils and into my brain. The decision was made to remove these devices, starting with all the ones in the extremities first and then tackling the 2 in my brain at a later time. As of now, all of the devices have been removed, with only some minor side effects to my eyesight and hearing. I've also begun to have nightmares of being held down under a bright light and my body put through painful experiments and surgeries, along with silvery-looking squid-type monsters looking down upon my immobile body. Today, I'm back with my parents, but I look like I'm over 80 years old. My skin is wrinkled and my body is crippled up and my hands hurt from arthritis. My back is humped over and I have to walk with a walker to get around. I'm now 40 years old, and I wonder if I will see another year. And I wonder who has done this to me. And what were those devices that were removed from my body at Walter Reed, and what did the military do with them? Why haven't they told me anything that might give me an explanation as to what has happened? And I wonder if I was abducted that night by aliens from the deck of the USS Ronald Reagan and then deposited in Utah after they did a bunch of experiments to me and wiped my memory from my mind. And last, what was the purpose of this, and why did they pick me? All right, welcome to the podcast. My name's Cam Buckner. This is the Dixiecryptid YouTube podcast. I have 3 stories in this podcast. They are just freaking awesome. You're not going to believe them. What if they're true? All right, let's jump into it. Hope you guys enjoy it. All right, here we go. 3 years ago, my son, my brother, and I hunted a parcel of private land opening weekend of deer rifle season. We were in the woods before daylight. My brother didn't feel up to the physical stress of the hills we were about to assault, so he stayed close to the truck on flat ground. My son and I were going to walk the area to drive deer to each other. We called it deer kicking. 3 hours later, and not seeing a deer, my son suggested that we get to a higher elevation. His idea was that the deer were up there and we just needed to get to them. We started the trek up the hill and fought briars and brambles the whole way. We were exhausted when we got to the top. When we reached the top, we walked around the ridge trying to get a better look at the terrain below when we walked up on a large structure. Tree limbs were formed into an almost perfect shelter. I assumed someone had built this, but looking closer, it became clear this was not built by human hands. It was well built, too, because my son crawled on top of it and walked around. It never gave an inch. Built on the edge of a steep drop-off made me a bit nervous, so I got him to jump down and we backed away. We sat down and we had a smoke. Then he asked if I could detect a strong odor. I couldn't smell anything due to an accident years ago that took away my sense of smell, but he said it was strong. The first guess was that Bigfoot had built this thing. We both laughed that off and decided to move on back down the hill. Taking a different route, we exited the thick brush and we stood on a ledge that gave us a great view of the valley below. In the distance, on the opposite hillside, I saw a dark figure scaling the mountain. I thought it was a bear, but I've never heard of bear in this area. I just watched for a minute. To see better, I raised my rifle scope to my eye, and I could clearly see this thing was on 2 legs and it was covered in dark hair. I asked my son to keep it in his scope while I dug for a camera that I carried on all my hunts. It took me forever to dig this camera out, and while I was doing that, my son lowered his rifle to look at me and ask what was taking so long. And when he got the object back in his scope, it was just going over the top of the hill. Neither of us could believe that that thing made it up that hill so fast, but it was gone. In my mind, it was a bear. It had to be. The day was shot, so we headed back to the truck. We were about halfway back to the truck, and a rock whizzed by our heads and tumbled off into the brush. We stopped and looked around for the person who had thrown it, but we never saw anyone. Then I realized it had to be my brother messing with us, so I called him on the two-way radio. He was close to the truck and emphatically insisted that he had not walked up that mountain. It was getting close to dark by now. We had not seen or heard an animal all day. No insects, birds, nothing. As we walked on to the truck, something was tracking us in the brush. While we walked, whatever was in the woods walked. If we stopped, it stopped. Limbs and twigs broke in the distance. We stopped and called out, hoping to get an answer from someone. Maybe we were on someone else's land. We got no answer, and then I recalled our joking that Bigfoot had built that structure that we had found, and now I wasn't laughing at that idea. The whole thing gave me an uneasy feeling, so we wasted no more time and we made it to the truck and out of the area in a hurry. Finally back at the truck and a bit unnerved, we started unloading our rifles and throwing our gear in the bed. We sat on the tailgate waiting for my brother to show up. I heard something in the brush off to my right. It was rustling in the brush. And then, like a bat out of hell, it took off running, and whatever it was big. It was crashing and tearing through the tangled mess like a bulldozer. It's hard to explain how this experience affected me. It really shook me up. If I heard an elephant crashing through the brush, I think it would sound the same. In the distance, I heard a sound that I will never be able to replicate. It was a sort of a howl or scream, and it was terrifying to my ears. The radio cracked, and it was my brother asking us if we had kicked up a deer, to which we both immediately responded, no, and to get back to the truck, we needed to go. He finally walked up, and I hurriedly pushed him in the truck. I started the engine and I threw gravel behind me as I sped away. And on the drive home, we recounted the story to him, and he was sure that we had encountered a bear. My son and I, we knew it wasn't a bear. We knew exactly what this thing was. The next year, we were told that this piece of land was posted and we no longer had permission to hunt it. That was fine with me. I wasn't going back to that place anyway. We got permission to hunt land not far from this location the next year. There are signs of Bigfoot on this property too, but they never messed with us, so we continued to hunt it. This year, I'm staying out of the woods. I have concluded that we are invading their territory and it must cause them stress. I don't want to do that to these creatures. I've studied the phenomenon lately and learned quite a bit, and I think they are closer to humans than we think. This is not an average animal. So from now on, I'm going to be staying out of their habitat. Last year, on June the 2nd, I was riding into one of our base camps that we use for elk hunting. My younger brother and myself operate a guide service that we inherited from our father and his father before that. We lease out hundreds of thousands of acres in several states and don't have any need to advertise or ask for clients because we're now booked out for 5 years in advance. We have professional athletes, billionaires, actors, and politicians as clients. Any one of these clients will pay 6 digits for a record book bull elk. And I really don't want to give my name because it could be devastating to my business if it was discovered what I'm about to tell you. The only other person I've told was my brother, who I had to confide in. I arrived in the early afternoon after a pleasant 2-day ride on horseback. There are two ways into our camps, and that is horseback or helicopter, which we've had a couple of our clients opt to do. I crossed the bridge that my father and grandfather built over the fast-moving narrow river that was still flowing quick from the snow melt from the higher altitudes. I rode right into the makeshift corral with Dusty and the two pack mules. That only offered an illusion of containment because we wanted to give the horses a chance to run if a bear or cougar visited while we weren't around. We didn't worry much about the horses or mules running off because they were like big dogs rather than horses, and they would come back when we called them, and they wouldn't travel far away even if there was danger present. I quickly took inventory of the camp and raised the coolers off the ground, as they had 2 weeks' worth of food in them, and I didn't want the local bear population getting to feel comfortable visiting the camp, and I cooked up dinner and I turned in for the night. For the next 2 days, I began to scout the area for elk sign, but I didn't find so much as a hoof print even in the watering holes that the bulls loved to dig up. Arriving back at the camp, I discovered my camp torn to bits and the coolers had been pulled down and emptied, only leaving a single pack of bacon and some bottles of frozen water. The mules didn't appear to be concerned whatsoever about the visitors, and in fact looked like someone had tried to braid their manes and tails. Well, to me, this trip was over, and I was going to head back to the truck the next day, but I decided that I would give this bear or people something to think about before I left in the morning. I was up before sunup and ready to investigate the crime of stealing my food, and I snuck off into the woods. I was able to track something for a distance and even found some of the wrappers from the meat that I had brought, but by noon the trail had gone cold, and I knew I had to get on the trail if I was going to make it back to the truck sometime tomorrow. I was being quiet as I approached the camp, and I could tell that something was amiss. At the edge, I could see something big and hairy in the corral with the horse, but they weren't excited like they were in danger. They were just standing there. This animal still had a winter coat on it, and it was brown, and it was 4 to 6 inches long. And I reached down to my side and grabbed my lever-action 12-gauge and loaded a staggered buckshot deer slug combination for protection from bears or cougars. The first shot would be buckshot, and it would tear up and knock it backwards, and then the slug would kill it, and I would repeat it over 2 times. I had it in my grip now, and I flipped off the safety with the most subtle click. But I was heard, and this animal began to raise up on its feet. It was in that moment that I realized that this creature was standing over 8 foot tall, and it wasn't a bear, it was a Sasquatch. Well, I was in shock as this thing turned toward me, and it smiled at me. But when I smiled back at it, I guess I must have done something wrong, because it leaned forward and it roared at me. Now, I have been roared at by grizzly bears and cougars quite often, but none that could match the volume or the duration of the roar, even in the slightest. I snapped the gun up and was about to squeeze off the first shot when I was struck by another beast that was hiding just a couple of feet to my left. The force of the impact knocked me ass over ears through the air and into the river. Suddenly, I was being swept downstream in this cold water faster than you could dream, but I was glad to see how fast I was moving because I saw the 2 creatures running along the bank trying to catch up to me. I knew that I had been in the water over 20 minutes, and I knew that I needed to get out soon or I would freeze to death in this 60-degree water. I had not seen the creatures for some time now, but I decided to make my way to the other bank just to be safe. As I got to the bank, I realized that I was having trouble breathing and my left arm was stiff. I decided to head back to the truck, which would take me 4 to 5 days on foot. And I was going to have to be really careful because I lost my phone and shotgun, and I only had the .40 caliber Ruger on my hip and 15 rounds. I had walked 2 hours and stopped to build a fire to dry the rest of the way before dark set in and the temperatures dropped, and I had managed to doze off when I heard that roar again off in the distance, and it was answered by other roars from different locations. There was no time to rest now. I had to go. But I was hurting, and I mean I was hurting. But I sucked it up and I started trotting off to the east. Anyone else would have been lost and running around in the darkness until sunrise when the sun popped over the horizon. But I've been hunting this area for the past 40 years and I knew it better than the ranchers that owned it. I continued to hear the roars that night and something breaking limbs against tree up until the sky began to lighten up. But I never stopped and I kept moving, and I only stopped a couple of times at some small lakes to take a drink of water. And I traveled well into the afternoon, and I stopped against a tree and I was asleep in seconds. I was jarred awake by thunder in the distance, and I wondered if those creatures were still following me, and I forced myself to my feet and I started making tracks again. It was after midnight when the storm had passed and everything finally quieted down, which was when I heard another roar, and it was about half the distance away that I was the evening before. Well, this gave me motivation to push harder, and I picked up the pace, forcing myself to the extreme, knowing that if I didn't get out, they would be on me by morning. That night was the scariest 12 hours on the planet for me. The roars became more frequent and closer, and just a couple of hours before the sun popped up in the east, I started to get hit with rocks and sticks with amazing accuracy. I had no idea where they were being thrown from or how far away. So I kept going, afraid to stop, thinking I would be dinner or I'd be torn apart. But I refrained from reaching for my pistol because I believed that that was the trigger that set the attack off the other day, and I was hoping that they were just trying to push me out of their home range. I was relieved to see the sun crest the horizon that morning, and I knew it was about another 12 hours away from my truck. The good news was soon turned bitter, though, as I began to cough up blood, and I realized now that I had a broken rib that must have punctured my lung, and I was bleeding internally, and doubt swept in. I began to think of my 2 boys at home and my lovely wife, and I was wondering if they would ever find me out here before the wolves or bears discovered my body. And then I became concerned about my brother, because he would surely come looking for me, and I wondered what was going to happen to him if the creatures saw another human in their area. All this gave me more strength than I thought was possible for one human to have, and I was nearing the top of a ridge about 4 hours from the truck when I heard it. It was the sound of a truck nearby, and to my delight, I recognized it as one of the ranch trucks, but it was starting to pull away and my heart sank into my stomach. I grabbed my Ruger 40 cal and I started popping off rounds as fast as I could, and then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital in Denver, where I had been flown in by a helicopter after the ranch hands came to my rescue and called the medics. It was very expensive, but it was covered by a couple of our clients with deep pockets, which I'm extremely grateful to. My family was all there, and they were excited to see me wake up. I had just been through an 8-hour surgery on top of everything else to remove part of my lung and one of my kidneys. Everyone had assumed that I had been thrown from my horse and hurt myself during the fall, but I knew better than to correct them and tell them what had really happened. I asked my brother to stay back as everyone left to get rest, and I told him the story about what really happened. I don't think he completely believed me, but he promised me that he would not go back to that site without several of our friends with him. 2 weeks later, my brother came back from recovering the mules in Dusty to tell me about what he had found. He said that the camp was completely destroyed along with the corral and the bridge. He found Dusty and the mules a short distance away, which came running when he called to them, and he also found huge footprints in the mud around the camp, and then the rocks started being thrown at them, and they fled the area riding all night long to get back to the trucks and the trailer. Now he believes me. I wasn't physically able to guide last year. Now I wonder if I'll be able to guide mentally now. I decided to take on an apprentice to help me scout out other leases that we have, but I don't think we'll ever return to the bridge camp. Here is what I'm confused about. Why didn't they mess with the horses and the mules? And what did I do wrong to warrant the aggressive roar? I do understand that my reaction to that roar by pointing my shotgun at the creature was perceived as a threat, and that is probably what caused the second animal attack on me. I also believe that they could have caught me at any time that they would have desired, so I think they were just motivating me to leave as quickly as possible. And I also wonder if they had driven out all the local wildlife, because I never found any tracks of anything on that trip. Thanks for watching this podcast. If you thought it was good, make sure and come back for the next one I post, or go back through my library and listen to any of the 300 videos I already have up. And if you think it's worth your time, hit the thumbs up button and hit subscribe, even leave a nice comment. So until the next podcast, you guys have a good week, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks.